In this video, we're going to build and paint some cheap Stargrave terrain. So I recently got some terrain from Multiverse Gaming. It was cheap, and just to preface this, I did not know what grayboard was when I ordered this stuff. So I didn't know that grayboard was basically cardboard. Now, as you can see here, though, they had the laser kind of turned up a little bit high here. So the burnt wood smell was rather pungent, and definitely have to cover this stuff up with paint. But obviously, as always, first step is to wipe down the boards, take out all the little bits and pieces. This is a very simple kit. It's a very regardless of the fact that I don't really like the grayboard very much, but that's my own fault for not looking up what grayboard was. This actually is a very elegant kit. It's nice, especially considering how cheap it was. I want to say I bought it from Multiverse on Etsy, but I don't know if it was an official Multiverse or what, because the little flyer that's in here, the instructions actually are on a different website. It's now Multiverse Tax Store instead of Multiverse Gaming. So the first thing I noticed here, obviously you get what you pay for. The wood here is very bendy and wiggly. It doesn't fit very well. As you can see, I'm kind of moving things around and testing it. I did leave everything leaning over. So after dry fitting and testing everything, I decided to just throw it together and see what happens. Now, you don't want to let the glue dry on that bottom part, or even on the middle part before you continue. You want to get all of the struts in, because of the fact that you're going to have to adjust the wood a little bit before you're done. Now, as you can see, I'm doing this on the bag it came in for easier cleanup. So, because I did lean everything backwards, it does kind of arc over top of the base a little bit, which is fine. I did on here on this first piece, I made the mistake of not bending it enough. You do need to bend this grayboard quite a bit to get it to fit properly and to get it to stay. So make sure you do better than I did on the first piece here. I learned my lesson on the second. Once you're done bending everything in place, dry fit it and make sure it will stay. Because what I had to actually do is I had to kind of tinker with it and put a little more glue on it and just toy with it until I got it right and got it to stick. So on the subsequent pieces, I made sure to bend it, fit it, bend it, fit it until it fit perfectly well. You don't want to overbend it, but you don't want to underbend it. That's probably the only part here that was kind of tedious, and that was my own fault, because the rest of this was super easy to build. Now, as you can see, I have everything stuck in there, and there's a couple of little globs of glue. But what I decided to do to kind of reinforce this, because of the fact that it's leaning, it's not fully flush, I decided to do the same thing I did with the Avasa terrain, and I put some glue in there and then spread it out. Now here, as you can see, I'm testing before I put the grayboard, the cardboard, onto the rest of the wood, onto the MDF piece, just to make sure that everything fits properly. So for the second piece and the third piece, everything fit without a hitch. And honestly, even though this outer shell is cardboard, it's very nice. Now, the little bits here, as you can see, they add some extra panels and things that you can glue on. And I did do that. I did some gluing. I put some extra bits and pieces on the base. I put some, the little struts on there. And then I hit it with a matte coffee bean, which I'm finding the Krylon's matte coffee bean is working really well. Now, to make this easy, I grabbed a sponge and some plate mail metal, and I started sponging on the metal just to kind of give it some texture, let some of that coffee bean, shine through. Basically, it's pre-rusting everything. Now, it is a little darker than it looks because of the fact that everything is lit up so well on my workstation. You can't see that the coffee bean is actually a very dark color. It's like well, coffee bean brown, obviously. So I sponged that on all of this metal onto all of the different parts and pieces here on the front, and just making sure to not get it too much. I don't want it to be too clean, and I don't want it to be too shiny. So I made sure to just, kind of sponge it on sporadically. Now for the inside here, what I did is I did the same kind of stippling and sponging technique with my brush on the insides of it. Now, as you can see, I did miss a little spot underneath the struts when priming, but I'm not too worried about that because you're really honestly never going to see that. And here's the thing about this kind of stuff. This is a cheap terrain. It's going to be it's not going to be a centerpiece. It's going to be used for Stargrave, Necromunda, Warhammer. It's just going to be a piece on the battlefield. And it does not have to be perfect. It just has to look, decent. So as you can see here, like I said, it kind of, because of the fact that I let it kind of sit and arc forward, I was having a hard time getting the proper camera angle here for the camera to see what I was doing. So it kind of made things hard in that way, just because of the shape of it. But honestly, I bought this because of the shape of it also, because it kind of gives like an overhang kind of a feel for anyone that's going to be moving underneath it or whatnot. And obviously, if I'm going to be using this for Stargrave, I'm going to need some sort of like ship wreckage or whatnot. And that's what I plan on using this for, is to, make this part of my ship wreckage setup. Here soon, I hope to be recording my first Stargrave video. And it's going to be kind of a solo playthrough. Hopefully I'll be able to do that soon. So the floor on this, which is the base, I sort of just assumed that the floor is going to be a piece of metal as well, probably a piece of the ship. So other than the fact that I put some sand and gravel and whatnot on there, and a couple of bits and pieces, and even some concrete, I just went ahead and I stippled that metal piece onto the base as well. And once again, it doesn't have to look nice. It doesn't have to be pretty. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be, a piece of terrain. I'm trying something new here as well. I took the sponge and I used contrast paint, and then I wiped most of the contrast paint off and kind of spread it around a little bit as I was going, just to kind of, just to shake things up a little bit. It looked okay. I ended up actually going back with a brush and just kind of brushing a little bit on to a couple of different areas just to make the colors more vivid in a couple of spots. And it wasn't bad. I mean, it wasn't as great as the some of the orc terrain I did, but it's not bad. I mean, especially for what it is. It's a very simple piece of terrain, and as you can see, I'm just using my finger to kind of push the paint around and pull it around, and even take some of the paint off. The second thing I did, and here I'm just experimenting. I'm just using some of my homemade sepia wash. I didn't like the way that it turned out for streaking, so I ended up just not using the brown wash on this. I tend to prefer a darker wash when I do things. So I finally, after the surgery and whatnot, I finally got my black wash open. We'll get to that in a minute, but I finally got my black wash open and I used my black wash. Here, as you can see, once again, I'm experimenting with putting some Nuln oil on there and like putting some streaks on. But I ended up just kind of wanting to darken it down and make it look kind of grim and gritty, just like the rest of my terrain. So I decided to go ahead and just put my homemade wash on all of it instead of just putting a little bit at a time. Now here, I'm just painting a couple of the different pieces, the concrete pieces and the kind of rocky pieces that I put on there. I'm just using the gray paint to paint that cork and to paint the Gale Force 9 concrete bits, just to give kind of a bright contrast to a couple of pieces there, because I don't want the whole thing to be completely brown and you know, and dark. I went back later also and did a couple little touch-ups and some dry brushing on here too, because I felt like it needed to be just a hair brighter. So as you can see here, once again, I'm kind of sponging on and putting on some different color on here just to kind of make the panels a little bit different. I didn't want it all to be silver because that looks kind of boring and dull, but I also didn't want to make it too colorful because that kind of takes away from the metallic effect that I was going for with the sponge. Now here I'm using some Heartwood Brown by Reaper, and I'm using that to do a heavy dry brush, more of an overbrush on the sand and gravelly areas. And again, I could have gone more detailed with this, and I could have painted it all over and then dry brushed it a couple of times and whatnot. But again, this is all, for me, what I'm doing here, this is all just a simple terrain piece, and I just want a little splash of color on it. This is not going to be my centerpiece. So as you can see there, I'm just kind of overbrushing a little bit, putting a little more on there than I normally would if I were doing dry brushing. The little bits that come with this are really nice. I ended up not using the weird little bendy antenna pieces, but I did use the struts. The struts were kind of good. And as you can see on the side there, I ended up not using all of the plates that they give you too, because I didn't want the front to be too busy. So, you know, I ended up just putting a couple of pieces on there. Now, this is where I'm going back, and I decided actually that the highlight color that I was using was a little too much, a little too close to the other one. So I decided to pull open another Reaper paint here and put down a really, really bright highlight over top of the concrete bits and the rock bits that I put on there. Again, because I kind of felt like at that point I needed a little more contrast on what I was working on. And it turned out pretty good. I think it turned out all right. Now, as you can see here, I have finally gotten my homemade wash open, and I am washing the entire piece in black wash because of the fact that I kind of wanted everything to be a little darker and grittier than it was. Also, this wash, I don't know if it's the formula or whatnot. If you put a decent enough coat on something like I'm doing on this, it sort of actually creates kind of an acrylic outer shell. And this gray board is a little bit flimsy, so I was hoping it would reinforce it, and it does feel like it kind of reinforced everything a little bit. So here we go. We're going to wash it on up. Now, to shake things up, what you can do, and as you can see, I've just got a little bit of blue tape and some, I don't honestly remember what this stuff is, but I got it from Michael's. It's tape that you use to mask things off when you're painting, and it's very thin strips, so it's worked very well for all my Necromunda terrain and whatnot. And as you can see here, I kind of just took some yellow paint, sponged it over, and then I took the brush and I put a little bit more yellow in the center to kind of brighten up the very center of it. And as you can see, it's kind of sloppy, but it's hazard lines, and once again, this is going to be used in like a grim setting. I shook it up a little bit and did a kind of an X in the center. This last one was supposed to be an arrow, but that one did not turn out very well. So I'm going to call that one just a smudge and leave it where it is. Now, as you can see, this is the final terrain. This is what it looks like once it's all been painted up and washed and it's semi-dry. The wash has kind of put like an almost outer shell on it. Hopefully that'll keep it, from getting damaged too heavily, because this is very flimsy. But like I said, for what it is, it's worth it because it's cheap terrain. So that being said, that has been a build and paint. And if you like what you see, please like and subscribe. Consider joining me on Patreon, and I have a Discord now, and I'll leave all that in the notes. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate all of you.